Welcome to the Chronicles of Rome, Episode 6, the Battle of Lake Regillus, Rome and the Latin League. When a republic is young, its borders are not drawn in ink, they are carved in blood. In the first years following the fall of the monarchy, Rome was not yet an empire. It was barely a regional power. It was a single city, perched along the banks of the Tiber, surrounded by rivals and ringed by threats. The kings were gone. But the danger was not. The final king of Rome, Lucius Tarquinius Superbus, Tarquinius the Proud, had not accepted his exile quietly. His ambition and his belief in royal right did not die with his crown. Cast out by revolution and disgrace, he sought to reclaim his throne, not through diplomacy or peaceful petition, but with sword and alliance. He turned to Latium, the broader region of central Italy populated by Latin-speaking peoples, many of them bound together in what was known as the Latin League. This was a loose federation of Latin cities tied by kinship, religion, and mutual interest. For centuries, Rome had been one member among many, sharing festivals, rituals, and obligations with these neighboring communities. But with the monarchy gone, Rome was now governed by magistrates and law. And not all Latin cities approved of this new republicanism. Some feared it, others resented Rome's growing strength. Still others remained neutral, or even aligned with the Republic. The balance had shifted. Among Tarquin's most devoted allies was Octavius Mamilius, Prince of Tusculum. Mamilius was not just a political figure, he was family. The son-in-law of Tarquin, married to one of his daughters, and a powerful commander in his own right. He became the linchpin in a new coalition, a league of Latin cities, rallying to the banner of restoration. And so, war came. The Roman Senate, recognizing the gravity of the threat, turned to a seldom-used power, the appointment of a dictator. This was not the tyranny of a king, but a constitutional emergency office, granting a single man absolute authority for a limited term, typically 6 months during times of existential peril. In 496 BCE, that man was Aulus Postumius Albus. Postumius was no novice, a seasoned general, disciplined and resolute. At his side stood Titus Abutius Elva, appointed as Magister Equitum, master of the horse, commander of the cavalry, and second only to the dictator in authority. The Latin League gathered its forces, with Octavius Mamilius in command. Tarquin himself was present, though aged and no longer leading troops. The armies converged near a place called Lake Regillus, not far from the town of Frascati, southeast of Rome, in the shadow of the Alban Hills. The terrain was dry and open, a plateau marked by patches of scrub and scattered woodland. The lake itself, though named in the sources, may not have been a large body of water by the time of the battle, but it provided a landmark. The field was ideal for cavalry maneuvers and disciplined formations, a stage for blood and glory. The Roman forces were well drilled but anxious. This was no mere skirmish. It was a civil war in spirit, a battle between cousins, countrymen, and former allies. The Latin League soldiers were as skilled, as determined, and as Roman in culture as the forces they opposed. And so, the armies arrayed themselves. Postumius ordered his infantry into deep ranks, placing the citizen soldiers by experience and age, young fighters in the front, veterans behind. Though not yet the fully developed manipular system of later legions, Roman forces were already organized in tiers of experience, signaling a shift away from the rigid hoplite formations of the past. The cavalry, drawn from the equestrian class, formed on the flanks under the command of a Bucius. Mamilius countered with a mirror image. His Latin troops, trained in the same traditions, were bolstered by exiled Roman nobles, men with something to prove and everything to gain. In the rear, Tarquin himself waited, a living symbol of the old regime, watching the battle that would determine whether Rome remained a republic or returned to monarchy. Then the horns sounded. The lines advanced. The clash was thunderous. Spears splintered against shields. Pilum, if already in early use, cut through armor and bone. Men fought hand to hand, face to face. The front lines dissolved into chaos. At the center of it all came the moment that legend would immortalize, the duel between Titus Abutius and Octavius Mamilius. Both commanders led their cavalry in charges. The two men saw each other across the field and spurred their horses forward. They clashed with swords drawn, their retinues circling around them. Abutius was wounded in the arm. Mamilius suffered a chest injury, severe but not immediately fatal. Both were pulled from the melee by their men. The duel was inconclusive, but it marked the turning point of the day. As the fighting raged, the Romans began to waver. The Latin League pressed hard. The exiled nobles led furious assaults. For a moment, it seemed Rome might break. Dictator Postumius, seeing his cavalry falter, took a radical step. He ordered his horsemen to dismount and fight on foot, leveling the battlefield and signaling that no man, regardless of rank, was above sacrifice. Then, in the thick of dust and blood, something extraordinary occurred. 2 horsemen appeared, tall, identical, radiant in gleaming armor. They rode white chargers and carried spears tipped with fire. They charged into the heart of the enemy lines. Where they passed, the Latin soldiers faltered. Discipline cracked. The tide turned. The Romans claimed they were the Dioscuri, Castor and Pollux, twin sons of Zeus, gods of horsemanship and sacred protectors of oaths, sent by the heavens to defend the Republic in its hour of need. To the Romans, it did not matter whether it was vision, miracle, or morale. The effect was undeniable. The Latin League broke. Octavius Mamilius fell in the second half of the battle, struck down in renewed cavalry fighting. His death shattered the resolve of his army. The remnants of the Latin forces scattered, some fled, others surrendered. And Tarquinius Superbus, once king of Rome, now watched from a distance as his final hope turned to dust. He would never again raise an army. He wandered in exile and died, it is said, in Cumae, an old man remembered more for arrogance than glory. Rome had won. But this was more than a military victory. It was a statement. The Republic had defended itself not just against a foreign foe, but against regression, against the return of monarchy, against the idea that only kings could govern. In time, Rome would leverage this triumph into dominance over the Latin League. The old alliance was not dissolved immediately, but its balance shifted. Rome was now first among equals. Later treaties, especially the Foedus Cassianum, would formalize the relationship, binding Latin cities to Rome in joint military ventures, with Rome often taking the lead. And in the Forum, the memory of that battle endured. A temple was built to Castor and Pollux, the very gods believed to have turned the tide. The temple stood beside the Basilica Julia in the shadow of the Senate House. Its columns reached toward the sky. Every July 15th, the anniversary of the battle was marked with ceremonies, processions, and vows. The temple became a symbol not only of divine favor, but of civic identity. Senators met nearby. Tribunes spoke from its steps. It was a place of politics, prayer, and memory. Rome had stood alone, and Rome had prevailed. Next time, we turn our eyes northward, to the land of the Etruscans, to the city of Veii, a siege unlike any Rome had yet undertaken, a war of attrition, tunnels, treachery, and resolve, a conflict that would last for decades. But remember this, Rome's survival was never assured. It had to be won, on fields like Regillus, by men who refused to bow, and by stories that taught a republic how to endure. This has been the Chronicles of Rome. Join us next time as Rome lays siege to Veii and takes its first step toward Etruscan dominance.